Nocturnal Dominion of Death is technically the fifth full-length album from Vrykolakas. This is a Singapore-based death metal band, and one that started out as more of a bestial black death metal band, something they would expect from Singapore at the time. They were kind of in the same realm and time period as groups like Abhorror and Impiety, and their 1992 demo was pretty rough at the time, even for the time and the location, but it was still representative of that scene back then. They didn't really get much out beyond that point until 1999 when they reformed and put out what was basically a brutal death metal / grindcore influenced type of music that would eventually culminate in the release of a 2004 record. These are deep underground releases. They did not seem produced at all. They all have a very rough register to them, and this doesn't create any precedence for what they started to do when they kind of revived the project during the pandemic years and began to become much more prolific as maybe a studio only type of band. Their style changed, although they did return to some kind of brutal sounds on their first EP. Granted, they're much more focused on mid-paced, old-school death metal influenced sounds nowadays. So before we get into all that, we'll cut to a song here and just get right into what this record sounds like. And we'll see that it's a continuation of what they've been doing since their third album. When death metal is approached in such a simple way, it's very clear where it started in terms of how it was put together. And I would say that when you listen to this band and their last three albums, you'll find immediately that it's all very clearly written around the riff, and the guitarist is very much kind of putting on the show here in terms of simple riff progressions that songs are built around, and the pacing of each song is not necessarily fully figured out. Some of the there's a certain bluntness to a lot of these songs that it's very different than the brutal stuff they were doing before, which was forced along by sort of a more manic pace. And this music is taking its time. It's moving in maybe a little slightly more sophisticated motions here and there, though this record doesn't necessarily outdo a lot of these maybe slightly more technical vision of their 2021 record, and overall we do get a simpler vision of their sound that still has some of those brutal kind of late 90s early 2000s death metal styles in there. I do hear a bit of Deicide and Nile in their sound, among, you can tell they're fans of many things, but it's a kind of a classic old school death metal sound that pushes beyond 1993 in terms of its pace and movement. And this is kind of written for one guitar. There's a couple of songs that are clearly written for two, and the big thing is that the production values are better here than on the last few, though they retain parity in every sense to the and Vrykolakas brings chaos and destruction. There's really no depth here that I can really dig into otherwise, because I didn't really find there was a clear concept in terms of the lyrics, and I think the riffs were pretty straightforward for the most part. There isn't a real knack or anything that really stands out to me about this band, though they certainly have their own style and feeling to the way that they approach death metal, which is not it's not just another thing. This is a unique sort of voice. I just can't really put my finger on it. I think otherwise it was a pleasant enough death metal experience in terms of well-considered album art. There were no real complaints here on this album for me, and I had a nice time with it, though I don't think that it stands out or is tuneful enough to really hit me over the head and put it much more than just slightly above average. So I don't really have that much to say about this record in terms of the details. I don't think it has impressive lasting value, though I think that there is value to the listen. I don't think that its style stands out too much, but it was all up to a strong standard and is worth listening to. So, so that's a moderately high recommendation. It's worth checking out if you're looking for something a little bit more obscure. Again, I think that they're on a pretty strong thread as they have been since they kind of brought things back together in 2020. So check that out if you will. If you just need to hear all the death metal out there, this is a good option. It released on April 21st on a host of different record labels all over the world. So check that out as you see fit.